Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am Rav Achitani, President of EGSI Consulting, and today I'd like to talk to you about if the West African cocoa industry being threatened by the palm oil industry. Equatorial West Africa is ideally suited for cultivating cocoa. Countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana together produce about 56% of the world's cocoa. However, the cocoa crop is susceptible to vagaries of the weather and is also prone to a number of regionally dominant pests and diseases such as black pod, CSSV, and others. Many smallholders that are cocoa farmers lack adequate resources as well as adequate financial resources to apply timely fertilizers, pesticides, and fungicides to prevent such diseases from occurring. The lack of adequate post-harvest technologies is also contributing to quality issues because most of the beans are sun-dried, and if there's heavy rain or very cloudy conditions, you have the possibility for developing mold on the beans, and this in turn affects the quality and the price. There are also other issues such as cross-border smuggling of beans into Ghana because there are favorable prices elsewhere. Here is an example of a healthy cocoa tree near Divo in Cote d'Ivoire. As you can see, it's a very healthy plant with a considerable amount of litter on the ground. Now, litter is good to some extent, but it can also harbor pests and diseases which can really affect the quality of the beans in the long haul. Here is another example of a cocoa tree that has been infected by black pod. As you can see, there are a number of black pods in the cocoa tree, and also there are a few lying on the ground. So when you don't apply adequate pesticides and fungicides, you can have a high incidence of pests and diseases. Now, there are also other integrated pest management techniques where you don't have to apply as much of pesticides and fungicides, but you require considerable sustained programs to implement integrated pest management, which are actually more effective than spraying chemicals. Many large cocoa companies, foreign government agencies, and international organizations are providing fellowships, technical assistance, and farmer training in many parts of West Africa. However, the needs are overwhelming, and sometimes more aid is needed in these countries. Another issue is child labor, primarily driven by low wages and a lack of adequate social reforms and programs in many of these countries. It will take considerable time effort and sustainable international assistance to improve children's education and welfare in West Africa. This is not an issue where you can just turn off a switch and it will disappear the next day. It has deep-rooted social causes that will take considerable time and effort to take care of these problems. Even in many parts of Southeast Asia, we continuously hear about situations where child labor is being utilized, though not accepted by many of the governments. Here's an example of a good cocoa harvest from a tree in Côte d'Ivoire. On the surface it looks very nice with large number of pods. However, there are, as you can see, a couple of 3 pods that have black blotches on them, as well as 1 or 2 pods that have completely black surface on them due to the black pod disease. So there are considerable losses in harvest due to pests and diseases, and this is very common in subsistence type of farming, where the farmers have very few resources and consequently cannot apply timely pesticides and fungicides and so on. An additional factor is the lack of adequate, what I call, sanitary and phytosanitary or SPS issues, where the infected pods are allowed to rot on the floor, and this in turn harbors more pests and more diseases, and it's like a vicious cycle. In other words, it's difficult to eradicate diseases when SPS practices are not ideally followed. So there are issues where farmers also need training, and it's very clear from these pictures why they do need more training. The issue is in West Africa, it's not like the United States or Europe, where universities are providing assistance to farmers, and even government agencies, agricultural departments are providing farmer extension services. So these are non-existent in many parts of West Africa. So the farmers have very little resource to turn to, and so this kind of compounds the problem. A couple of years ago, I was in St. Lucia, the Caribbean, visiting a cocoa plantation, and where they were growing flavored varieties of cocoa that fetch premium prices in international markets. And one of the things that struck me was how well the plantation was groomed with very little rotting litter, and the quality of the beans was really excellent. The pods have no blotches on them, and the beans are very lush and thick, and it's really a fascinating visit to the farm. So what I'm trying to say is, if adequate resources are provided good cultural practices are followed, then good yields will follow and good profits will ensue. So all of this is it's like a package. In other words, you either have it or you don't. And this slide shows that it can be accomplished in any part of the world. Now let's look at another estate crop, the oil palm, in which the palm oil industry in Southeast Asia dominates its production. In fact, Indonesia and Malaysia are two of the world's leading producers of palm oil. Palm oil is also one of the world's leading, in fact, the largest selling edible oil, and it's a staple of the masses. What happens is soybean oil, canola, these are very, very expensive in countries in Southeast Asia, Africa, the Middle East. So many of the middle and lower middle class have no other choice but to really consume palm oil because it's more economical to do so. It's not so much the health issues but sheer affordability. Palm oil and its derived products, as you all know, are used worldwide in a variety of snack foods and also in the manufacture of biofuels such as biodiesel. All you have to do is look up the ingredients in the next snack food or peanut butter or cocoa butter you're consuming, and you will find palm oil or its derivatives listed prominently in the ingredients. So this is a big industry, and unlike the cocoa industry, the palm oil industry is dominated by corporate farms. And many of these corporate farms in Southeast Asia have quite literally hundreds of thousands, even a million hectares of land. So they are huge by any stretch of the imagination. So they're very good at farming the oil palm. They have it down to an art. There's no child labor involved because there's not a whole lot of child can do in an oil plantation, palm oil plantation. The plantations are typically, as I mentioned, thousands of hectares in size, and it takes about 3 to 4 years for a plantation to become fully productive and start producing fresh fruit bunches, which are then brought into oil palm through oil mills. So there's a big infrastructure goes along with these oil farm estates. From the bean, you start the growth of the palm tree to fresh fruit bunches and the extraction of crude palm oil, refineries and derived products, and then exports. So this is a very well established industrial giant. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the palm oil industry is predominantly a corporate industry with huge companies with huge acreages. This slide is actually a satellite photo from Digital Globe. I actually found it in Google Earth. This is a plantation near Jambi in Sumatra, Indonesia. And you can see it's how well manicured it is with thousands and thousands of trees perfectly aligned. It's like almost like a carpet. And this is in a way, it's the beauty of corporate estates. They're very well run, well manicured. They have resources to combat pests, diseases. They apply fertilizers on a regular basis. They also follow what I mentioned earlier, integrated pest management techniques. They release a number of owls in their estates to combat rodents. And so they have a number of IPM programs. And so they do practice a lot of sound agricultural practices, and in turn they reap large benefits because of that. Now let us examine some of the driving forces behind this increasing global demand and high returns in palm oil cultivation. I've seen reports in the media where countries from Honduras to the Solomon Islands are seriously pursuing cultivating the oil palm. So why are these countries so astonished by this particular species of plants? The increasing global demand for edible oils, as well as the dwindling sustainable land resources in Southeast Asia, as you know, are encouraging many palm oil producers to expand into available and in some cases virgin agricultural lands in West Africa, as well as in the Latin America, Caribbean countries. Another, as I mentioned, the demand is very large, especially from not only from countries such as India, the number one importer of crude palm oil, as well as China. These are two giants that are growing at a very rapid rate, the large middle class populations. Then we have also Indonesia, which consumes a lot of palm oil, as well as Africa and the Middle East, and populations are growing in many of these countries. So it's hard to keep up with the demand. That's why these companies are looking for different regions to grow. Even countries like India and China, the governments themselves have bought land in countries like Ethiopia and other parts of Africa to grow crops for their populations. So the demand for agricultural land is growing day by day. Another factor that is a very strong driving force for embracing oil palm is the high returns in investments from oil palm cultivation. Typically it's about 4 times higher than any other food or fiber crop, primarily because it's a 24/7 crop. In other words, the fresh fruit bunches are being produced every month. So there's continuous harvest throughout the year. There is no idle time, unlike soybeans or corn, which have a long idle period or a fallow period. So keep that in mind, the high return in agriculture, especially by cultivating this particular crop. So what I'm saying is competition for agricultural land will favor crops with higher returns. So when you're dealing with food crops or fiber crops, the most competitive crop is the oil palm. So when you're growing coffee or cocoa or rubber in West Africa or even Southeast Asia, the returns from palm oil are what are driving the acreage. In other words, it's pure, at the end of the day, it's pure economics and profits. I'll give you an example of how Malaysia diverted much of its cocoa acreage and rubber acreage into oil palm cultivation. Here is an interesting slide showing the progress of cocoa area in Malaysia. As you know, in Malaysia, we have Peninsular Malaysia in the west and Sabah and Sarawak in the east. The important thing to remember in plantation crops is that crops such as tea, coffee, rubber, oil palm, and cocoa, they all grow under similar climatic conditions. So all these crops are competing for the same land area. And how they compete is with returns. In other words, if a particular crop gives you a higher return than the other, then that particular crop is embraced. Now, having corporate agriculture, one of the advantages, if you will, I would like to say, is that they have the ability to convert large acreages into almost a monocrop culture. So this is one of the side effects of corporate farming, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's economics that takes place and acts. Not only are the plantation companies interested in profits and growth, but even the governments like it because they get considerable revenue from the exports of these edible oils as well as derived products that are used very heavily in the food industry. Now, here's the slide that goes back to 1980, and we see that the area under the cocoa crop has risen all the way up to about the late 80s and early 90s, and then it has taken a dramatic downward trend since then. So from a high of about 415,000 hectares to currently we're way about 27,000 hectares. That is a dramatic drop in cocoa area in Malaysia. Now, as you know, Malaysia is one of the bigger cocoa grinding countries in Asia because there's a lot of manufacturing of candy bars and chocolate derived products in Malaysia, and there's a very huge market in Southeast Asia. So that shows they like cocoa very much. Maybe not cultivated, but they certainly are big grinders of cocoa powder. Cocoa. Every 20 years or so, the oil palms have to be replanted, primarily because it's difficult to prune them beyond that height. Otherwise they can produce up to 50-60 years of age, but then it's very difficult to harvest because it'll be so high. So most producers of the oil palm prefer to chop down the existing trees and replant them, and sometimes you might have a conversion for rubber plantations or coffee plantations being added to existing land. As you can see in the background of this picture, there's a rubber tree lying flat on the ground, and then there's a lot of debris from the foreground of old palm trees that have been chopped up and will be allowed to be fallow, and then the new seedlings will be planted within. So this rotation usually takes place every 20 years. So ideally you would want at least a third of your estate to be recycling every year or so. So I showed you in the previous slide a picture of where the field was being plowed in, and now what happens after you plant oil palm seedlings. After about a year, you can see these seedlings have grown considerably. They're about 10 inches wide at the base, and this is an example of a young oil palm plantation. Now even these small sized trees produce fresh fruit bunches. They weigh about 5-6 kilograms, so they produce small bunches. They're like the full-blown 30-kilogram bunches that you see. So in about 3 to 4 years, this particular plantation will produce all fresh fruit bunches that can be ground up and processed into crude palm oil and then shipped. So this is how the fields are plowed in, replanted, and the plants cultivated in order to produce fresh fruit bunches, which are subsequently taken to the mills and oil extracted. So this particular oil palm is relatively more disease. It can withstand diseases and requires less maintenance than other crops. Now they do have diseases that can cause kill the trees and so forth, but then the plantation crew are well trained to isolate those trees and burn them so that the disease infected trees are contained. The soil is sterilized. So all this takes resources. You cannot do this in a subsistence level farming. It requires people, it requires technology, it requires resources. In this slide, I'm showing you a picture of a mature oil palm plantation in Indonesia, and you can see how well it is maintained. You have some ferns growing on the trunks of the trees. That's quite normal. The fronds, the dried fronds, are placed between the rows, and they're all lined up so that the clutter is minimal. The surface is relatively clean so that you don't have pests harboring in the debris. And so all in all, it gives a good report card on this estate, and it typically takes about one person to handle about 10 hectares of oil palm plantation. That's typically the ratio is 1 person for every 10 hectares. That's the labor requirement. A lot of the harvesting is done in Malaysia. It's done mechanically, but in Indonesia it's still done by hand, and so it is a little labor intensive, but it's done quite systematically and very quickly. Now, the oil palm is originally a native to West Africa, from where it spread into Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So now it's making a full circle. In other words, after spreading all over the tropical world, the interest is coming back to grow more oil palm in equatorial Africa, where it originated. What is happening is, as the land pressure is increasing in Southeast Asia, most of the arable land has already been brought under cultivation. So now the marginal areas for production are being attacked. You may have orangutan habitats or peat bog areas. Some of them have to be preserved in the interest of preservation of species or preservation of land. So the governments in these countries are faced with these sort of issues. A number of the burnings of land and orangutan habitats that you hear about is mostly done in remote areas where the governments really do not have much control over. And some of these areas are also rebel areas, so it's very difficult to enforce laws in some of these areas in Asia. Now there's considerable pressure from the West on exporting of sustainably developed palm oil. So the corporations and the government in these countries are aware of these restrictions and the demands. So they're slowly trying to see where else can we expand. Now, Africa is a hitherto unexplored option for many of these countries, and countries like China and India have already shown examples of how they can bring vast areas of land in Ethiopia or wherever into productive agriculture. Not only that, the governments in these countries are also looking at oil palm production from not only providing employment and resources and the whole supply chain of edible oil in their countries, because as you know, Africa is a big market for edible oils, and also because of the increased demand globally, Africa is looking forward to exporting palm oil not only to Asia, countries such as India and China, but also Europe and other parts of the world, because crude palm oil is also used in the preparation of biofuels such as biodiesel. So it's not only an edible oil, not only an additive in food, but also it's has high potential in biofuels as well. So that's one of the reasons why countries such as Brazil, Colombia, Honduras, Ecuador are looking to actually increasing their existing oil palm area, primarily because of the lure of biofuels. So depending on where you are, the importance of the crop might vary a little bit. So once again, the high profitability and the export potential, primarily for revenues, attracts the oil palm in many of the West African countries. Countries such as Cameroon, Gabon, Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, Nigeria, and others are attracting investors. And many of these big companies from Asia, they have significant assets. And so they're moving into some of the West African countries, buying land, not only land, but they're developing the infrastructure. In other words, the roads, the buildings, the oil mills, the port facilities, and the whole supply chain. So when there's people coming in to do this sort of supply chain type ventures, they do attract a lot of governments, and they are given a lot of privileges to do so. So it is in a way very profitable, very attractive to both the countries themselves as well as the investors. And these investors have considerable experience running big estates in difficult circumstances in Southeast Asia. So they're quite accustomed to handling the labor, the issues, the political issues, and so forth. Now, what I'm saying is that subsistence farms will eventually give way to corporate farms, as small farmers cannot store and hedge in order to be profitable. In other words, the cocoa farmers have to harvest, process, and bring the beans to the market as soon as they're ready. They don't have the resources to hedge. They don't have the warehouses to store the beans in controlled temperatures and market them when the price is more profitable. Oftentimes the quality is poor because they don't have adequate post-harvest technology or post-harvest facilities to process the beans in controlled environments. So when the farmer comes to the market, oftentimes the beans have mold or quality issues and the price goes down. So it's a difficult battle for the subsistence farmer. It's much like when a big wholesale or retailer moves into your neighborhood. They'll displace the small guys. It's just the way the corporate world is. And so until or unless adequate resources are provided to these subsistence farmers, they will find it very difficult to survive. So it's essential that if we are to entertain these small farmers, then we have to provide them more resources, or maybe even take a larger stake in the industry. And here are some of my conclusions. Agricultural land, as I mentioned, is becoming a premium worldwide. It's not only Africa, but even in the US Midwest, the price of agricultural land has skyrocketed. South and Southeast Asian countries are investing heavily in Africa. Many countries in West Africa are attracted by the lure of palm oil, the oil palm, and its profitability and its export potential. Even in South and Central America, countries such as Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras are also expanding their oil palm acreage because of the lure of biodiesel. Now, cocoa is a difficult crop to cultivate, primarily because of its vulnerability to regionally dominant diseases. When I mean regionally dominant, the set of diseases that are prevalent in Latin America, Caribbean are a bit different from those in West Africa and different from those in Southeast Asia. And we need more research urgently to address many of these issues. The demand for cocoa is projected to increase in the future, especially as the middle and upper middle class populations in Asia expand. Countries in not only India, China, but even populations in Vietnam, Cambodia, and all these countries, Indonesia, they're all growing very rapidly. And so the demand for cocoa will continue to increase. However, the number of areas where cocoa can be cultivated is limited, and not only limited, but these are heavily disease prone areas because of the dominant diseases for the cocoa plant. So the farmers are finding it more and more difficult. Unless they get adequate returns, it will be hard for them to survive. The cocoa and the chocolate industries may have to increase their stakes in West Africa in order to prevent a shrinkage in the cocoa area, as we have seen in Malaysia. Now, Malaysia is an extreme case where the government lays down the expansion plans and so forth. Now, Africa may be a little less organized than Malaysia, but at the end of the day, it's economics. And if an oil palm estate provides more profits, then people are going to embrace oil palm. So it depends, or remains to be seen, how the West African farmers, particularly in the Ivory Coast and Gabon and Ghana, will respond to this sort of pressure. We have seen Cameroon, where large oil palm estates are being developed, companies not only from Asia but even from the Western Hemisphere. So the competition is on, and my fear is that crops that return better will eventually succeed in grabbing the area for agricultural purposes. So we at this juncture have to safeguard the cocoa areas in order to sustain the current level of growth, but also to meet the future needs. Maybe, I don't know, I mean, we may have to buy more land and cultivate cocoa. If the corporations own the land, then they'll cultivate cocoa no matter what other crops do. So it is, at the end of the day, we have to have land ownership at some point in order to sustain or even increase the existing growth of acreage in West Africa. Now, in other countries such as Indonesia, yes, the climate is suitable, but they are already heavily invested in oil palm. Countries such as Brazil are doing well, despite some of the diseases such as the witch's broom and so forth. But it's limited. More research is needed in order to combat some of these issues. So, in conclusion, I would say the cocoa industry has to increase their stakes in West Africa. That is certainly has to happen in order to preserve the cocoa culture in that part of West Africa. Thank you. And a little bit of and a final note from us at EGSI Consulting. Follow us online at Twitter, www.twitter.com with Cocoa World News, and www.twitter.com for Palm Oil World. We are also on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Google Plus at EGSI Consulting. Thank you for your continued support. Have a great day. Bye.